Well, you're watching Boulton and Co here on Sky News, and in exactly 3 weeks' time they'll be about to start the votes in the AV referendum campaign. The Economist magazine has some interesting comments on that today. It says that both sides, the Yes and the No campaign, have staged a mud pie fight with spurious partisan claims and counterclaims, and goes on to accuse them both of cartoonish exaggeration. Well, joining me now is Baroness Warsi of the No campaign, of course Conservative Cabinet Minister. She's just unveiled a new poster. What does your poster show?
Well, the poster shows two people in a boxing match, and it shows that the person who is on the floor knocked out wins, because what we're trying to show is that under AV, losers can become winners.
Would you show that? Would you accept that that is a cartoonish exaggeration?
No, I think it is a way in which you try and explain to the general public what is actually quite a confusing and boring subject.
But if you have two boxers, that's not going to happen. If you have two boxers, it's not going to happen. Two candidates, one will win, the one with the most votes. So it's a rubbish poster.
No, it isn't actually, Adam, because if you actually have a situation where you have 5 or 6 different candidates...
And you show 5 or 6 different candidates?
No, well, let me explain. An AV is actually a system which the Yes campaign are saying should be about somebody getting more than 50% of the votes. What you can find is that the two that are left in the final are not necessarily, the person who wins is not necessarily the person who got the first vote.
And they've got AV in Australia, haven't they?
They have, and what happened
and
when...
do you know how often it happens in Australia, that the person who doesn't come first in the first round wins?
Well, Adam, are you going to let me answer the question? Let me tell you what happens in Australia. When they bought in the AV system...
I've asked you what happens in Australia.
Well, let me tell you what happens in Australia. When they bought in AV, they actually had a situation where voter turnout went down, and then they had to bring in compulsory voting. And in Australia, 6 out of 10 people want to go back to the system that we have.
Right, thank you.
Now, we have a system...
Now you'll answer my question about Australia, where you accept they have an AV system.
Yes.
How often does the candidate who is not coming first in the first round not go on to win? I.e., how often does your poster happen? Do you know?
Well, they could. I'll give you the details. I mean, I couldn't give you the detail right now.
Well, it's a matter of fact. It's been recorded by academic. How often do you think it happens?
Well, you tell me.
No, you tell me.
I'm telling you, it is something that does happen.
You put up this poster saying that the person who comes first doesn't come first. I'm asking you, under AV in Australia, how often it happens where they have an AV system? I'm
telling you that under AV there are people who do not get more votes than everybody else first time round who go on to win.
How often does it happen?
And that is a system which is confusing and is unfair.
You're saying that AV will distort the results. I'm saying if you have a list of candidates and one candidate has the most votes in the first round, how often does that candidate not go on to win, which is your claim? That is your accusation against the system.
I will be able to tell. I can go away and I can tell you how often, in which elections, at which level, in which state, various candidates have won.
I'll tell you. I'll tell you. In most cases, it's under 5% in most of the elections they've had. And actually, in Australia, where they've had an AV system, another one of your claims is that they go on and they have coalition governments, and they've had very few coalition governments in Australia. So that's not true either.
Well, Adam, let me tell you something very clearly.
I think you're insulting the voters. I don't care how people vote, but you are insulting the voters.
You're not allowing me to even talk about what the arguments are. So what I'm saying to you is this, that I think even if one person wins an election where they got less votes than the person who came first, that is something that should not happen in our country. We have a very simple principle that one person has one vote and every vote is of equal value, and the person who gets the most votes wins. Now that is a system which is not broken.
I don't remember hearing the Conservatives complain when they had overall majorities with less than 50% of the votes in the past.
Well, this is not about 50% of the votes. This is about something more fundamental than that. This is about a very simple fundamental belief that every person in this country, wherever they come from, however much they earn, whatever colour they are, actually have exactly the same vote as their neighbour, and both their votes are of equal value. Now, I think that is a principle that is worth defending. You may not agree with that, but I think that is something that is so fundamental to the way that we have actually fought elections in the past. And
your opponents would say in the Yes campaign, they would say, one vote only counts once for a candidate. That's what happens under the AV system.
I don't understand what you've just said.
Well, it's made it very clear. It only counts once. Because in the end, a candidate it wins or is defeated, and the total number of votes are
true.
counted on the last two candidates. So that's what happens.
But that's completely
it's not completely untrue.
It is completely untrue, because actually, if you vote for the sixth candidate, you vote once, you are then knocked out, but your second preference is counted.
You have put out an advert. No. Your broadcast this week, it shows, first of all, a race with two candidates way ahead, and somehow magically the third candidate wins, which is simply impossible under the AV system. It then goes on to suggest that somehow, if you have AV, you're also automatically going to have the sort of coalition stitch-up situation, which, of course, you're a member of the government with the Lib Dems right now, which, again, is not remotely connected to the voting system.
But, again, on both of those counts, with all due respect, Adam, you are wrong. What we are talking about here is fundamental principles, and each of those arguments and each of those
you're talking about fundamental principles now. I was asking you about your advertising campaign and saying it was guilty of cartoonish exaggeration.
I'll try and answer. Well, I don't think actually this is about cartoons. This is about something very fundamental, and what I'm talking to you about is actually, you may agree with AV, you may want AV. Adam,
I don't. It's not about my opinion. It's about whether the politicians are insulting the public. That's what concerns me.
Well, I think
misrepresenting the case and insulting the public.
I think it would be an insult to the public to throw away a system that we have had for decades, which generations have fought for, and which billions around the world think is a good system, and therefore they follow it, to bring in a system which is followed in 3 countries around the world, one of which has a dictator, and in Australia 6 out of 10
It's not so long ago, though. It's not actually a historical precedent in this country, is it? Because it's not so long ago we had 2-member constituencies in university towns.
No, but it's not actually. But their votes were exactly the same. You had one person who had one vote, and every vote was of equal value.
You had 2 members.
It is a system. Yeah, but you can have 2 or 3 member constituencies in terms of wards on local elections. That doesn't actually take away from the fact that every person who goes into the ballot booth and votes actually has one vote, and that vote is of equal value.
And you disapprove of the electoral systems in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland?
I think general elections are when the whole nation comes out and elects constituencies.
Well, so the whole nation is
and members of Parliament.
So you think that a fundamentally unfair and corrupt system should stay in place in Scotland and Northern Ireland and Wales?
I think that the system that we're talking about on May the 5th is a referendum on whether or not at future general elections we keep the present system of first past the post, or change it to AV. I don't think AV is a good system. Now, whether they operate it in Scotland, or the way they operate it in Scotland, or they operate it in Wales, has already been put in place. What we are arguing about on May the 5th is whether or not we should have this system, which is costly,
and how close do you think it is right now?
Which is unfair. Well, it's close. I don't think you can take the result for granted, which is why I'm campaigning so passionately for a principle that I fundamentally believe in.
And will the government be bound by the result?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Well, it's in the legislation.
You promise. Okay.